company that makes the Gripen has told CTV News that 10,000 manufacturing and research jobs could land in Canada if Ottawa adds the Swedish fighter jet to its military fleet.
In Canada, to do their own upgrades, to build parts of it, to do final assembly and tests, we, as Saab, we are prepared to do that technology transfer to Canada and support that build-up.
Swedish defense firm Saab wants Canada to buy and build its fighter jets. The firm is pitching a partnership with Bombardier and promising to create up to 10,000 jobs along with it.
Saab, the Swedish defense company behind the Gripen fighter jet, wants Canada to do more than just buy airplanes. Their pitch is a full partnership. Build parts of the jet in Canada, do final assembly and testing on Canadian soil, and hand over enough technology that Canada can handle upgrades and future modifications without having to ask permission. They've even floated a headline number that instantly grabs attention. Up to 10,000 jobs tied to manufacturing and research if Ottawa brings the Gripen into the fleet. On the surface, it sounds like a classic procurement story. The kind governments do every few decades: replace an aging fighter fleet, sign a contract, train pilots, move on. Canada's CF-18s are old, and everyone knows the clock is ticking. For years, the expected ending to this story was the F-35. Canada would buy the American jet, lock into the program, and keep the North American defense machine running the way it always has. But that neat ending is exactly what got blown up, because the moment Canada started seriously entertaining Sweden's Gripen as an option, this stopped being a routine upgrade and turned into something way bigger: a test of sovereignty, a test of alliance politics, and a very uncomfortable look at how much control a country really has when its most advanced weapons depend on someone else's software, data, and approval. Behind closed doors, the tone reportedly changed fast. Instead of polite recommendations, Ottawa started receiving sharper warnings through diplomatic channels. Not the kind delivered at a podium, but the kind that lands with weight because it's coming from the people who control the ecosystem Canada lives inside. Through NORAD and NATO. And here's the part that rattled Washington. Canada didn't quietly back down. Instead, Canada's position hardened around one idea that almost never gets said out loud. Among close U.S. partners, Canada won't outsource its air sovereignty. That line hits like a brick, because it's not really about which jet looks better on a spec sheet. It's about who holds the keys once the jet is delivered, who controls the mission data, who approves weapon integration, who can update, modify, and adapt the aircraft as threats evolve. On paper, the Gripen shouldn't be causing panic. It's already in service with countries like Sweden, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Brazil. It's designed to work with Western standards, and it's built for tough conditions. It's not some outsider platform. It's not a rival block aircraft. It's a Western fighter. So why the intensity? Because the Gripen represents something the F-35 does not: a path to modern capability without being locked into an American-controlled pipeline. The argument isn't that the F-35 is weak. It isn't. The F-35 is arguably the most advanced multi-role fighter in the Western world when you factor stealth, sensors, and networked warfare. The issue is ownership in the deeper sense. With the Gripen, Saab is essentially saying, "We'll sell you the jet, but you'll actually own it. Your mission systems stay yours. Your upgrade path is yours. Your weapons integration can be yours." You don't wake up one day and realize critical parts of your air power depend on politics in another country. And that's the nightmare scenario for anyone trying to keep alliance control centralized. Because if Canada can run a modern fighter fleet with full authority over software, data, and upgrades while still operating alongside allies, then other countries will start asking the same question. Why are we accepting restrictions we don't have to accept? That's not about radar cross-sections. That's about momentum. It's about the influence that comes from being the gatekeeper. Now stack that against Canada's reality. Canada isn't buying fighters to wage desert wars. Canada's core problem is defending one of the largest airspaces on Earth, much of it in brutal, remote northern territory. The Arctic isn't a talking point. It's a daily operational challenge, and it's getting more serious as Russia increases long-range activity and as polar routes become more strategically important. In that environment, response time, reliability, and operating flexibility can matter more than perfect performance under ideal conditions. That's where the Gripen starts looking less like the cheaper alternative and more like a jet designed for the exact nightmare conditions Canada actually faces. Sweden built the Gripen around the assumption that in a real conflict, airbases get hit early, runways get cratered, command networks get disrupted, centralized planning gets stressed. So their doctrine leans into dispersion and survivability. Gripen pilots train for operations from highways and improvised strips. Ground crews are meant to refuel and rearm quickly with minimal equipment. Small teams can keep jets flying without needing a massive footprint. It's basically built for the idea that the sky won't wait for perfect logistics. The F-35 comes from a different philosophy. It thrives in deep integration, advanced maintenance environments, and constant digital support. Its stealth and sensor fusion are elite, but they're part of a tightly managed system. In high-end conflict, enemies don't just shoot at planes. They go after satellites, data links, fuel depots, and runways. When those systems start failing, the most advanced platform in the world can start feeling fragile if it depends too heavily on uninterrupted support. Again, that's not an attack on the F-35, it's a reminder of assumptions, and the Gripen is built on the assumption those assumptions break early. This is where Canada's debate reportedly shifted from which jet is best to what kind of war are we preparing for, and how much control do we want over the tools we're betting our security on. And then the pressure got louder. The United States signaled directly or indirectly that if Canada reduced or walked back its F-35 plans, the U.S. would have to compensate with increased American fighter operations tied to Canadian air defense. Under NORAD, both countries already coordinate cross-border responses to threats, and that system has run on trust for decades. But the messaging coming out of Washington suggested that Canada's procurement choices could force changes in how continental defense is carried out. That's not just a technical concern. That's leverage. It's also happening in a moment where Canada is staring at cost growth. Reports have pointed to projected cost increases in the billions over a relatively short period, enough to trigger political scrutiny and force a reassessment of whether the current plan still fits. Canada's defense priorities and economic reality, and when you mix rising costs with strained politics, the ground gets shaky. Fast at the same time, Saab's offer is built to be politically attractive inside Canada. Local manufacturing, technology transfer, and thousands of domestic jobs tied to high-value work. It's not just buy our jet, it's build part of your aerospace future around it. That's why this story is getting so heated. It's not only about capability, it's about what Canada gets in return beyond the aircraft: industrial capacity, research jobs, domestic control, and long-term independence. Because if you're into these kinds of real-world power plays, defense strategy, and the behind-the-scenes politics that never fit neatly into a headline, hit subscribe. I post stories like this where the official reason is usually only half the truth, and the other half is where things get interesting. Now let's get back to it. Zoom out, and the choice becomes a brutal trade-off. The F-35 gives Canada unmatched high-end capability and smoother integration with U.S. command networks and NATO planning. It keeps everything familiar: training pathways, interoperability, coalition operations, shared logistics, shared data structures. It's the safe option in the sense that it avoids rocking the alliance boat. But that capability comes with a real limitation: control. Software updates, sustainment systems, mission data processes, and the broader upgrade ecosystem are deeply tied to an American-managed structure. That can be fine when politics are stable. It becomes uncomfortable when politics are volatile. The more unpredictable Washington becomes, the more a country like Canada has to ask whether it's smart to tie core defense capability to systems it can't fully direct. The Gripen flips the trade dash off. It promises lower operating costs, more flexible basing, and much more national authority over key systems. Plus the kind of domestic industrial participation that politicians love because it creates jobs and builds local expertise. It also aligns with Arctic realities: harsh weather, long distances, limited infrastructure, and the need for aircraft that can keep flying when conditions are ugly. But it's not a free win. Choosing a non-U.S. fighter can complicate coalition planning and create friction around shared systems. It can create extra layers of work when it comes to joint operations and intelligence integration. And it can absolutely create political strain with Washington. especially if the US reads the decision as Canada stepping away from a shared defense. Architecture, and here's the uncomfortable truth, even with a non-US fighter, Canada still operates within a US-dominated sensor and command environment through NORAD. Full autonomy is not a switch you flip. But autonomy isn't binary. It's a dial. Degrees of control matter, especially when the stakes involve national security.